All right, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Or can I get a thumbs up? Oh, great. So good afternoon. So my name is Peter Pang. I'm the chair of emergency medicine at Indiana University. And it's my pleasure to actually be the moderator for this session entitled Faculty Salaries and Work Life in Emergency Medicine. So who wouldn't want to learn more about both? So it's really a privilege to be able to introduce Dr. Volturo, who's the professor and chair of emergency medicine at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Dr. Volturo.
Thank you, Peter. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. We'll try to advance it. There we go. Okay. Before we start, I just want to give special thanks to a number of people, particularly Jim Shulin, who has led the committee for many, many years and does this presentation and actually prepared these slides. Kathy Harbertson, who without her assistance, the benchmark committee would not be able to analyze all this data. Greg Archel, who's the chair of the benchmark committee and really the entire benchmark committee. The work you're about to see is the work of many, many, many people out there. So I want to thank them. Okay. Well, my computer's not advancing. There we go. I have no financial or other conflicts that to disclose as related to this. The 2020 survey obviously was touched a bit by COVID, as we all have been. We did, however, reach almost a same number of institutions that reported their data. The data you're about to see is from 90 academic institutions. Emergency department visits obviously were down a bit during 2020, as well as revenue, and you'll see how some of that has impacted. So, okay, in terms of faculty hours, if you look from 2016 to 2020, there's been an increase roughly about 2,000 hours, almost 2,100 hours. But we did see a decrease in faculty, total faculty hours, coverage hours in 2020. And that is probably related to COVID. We'll see how that goes next year. However, arrivals per hour stayed about the same at 2.2 patients per hour. So while our volume was down, we decreased our total hours of coverage. But at the same time, we did see patients at about the same pace. Now, this is a really interesting graph, and I'll try to use my pointer here if I can. This section here, the center plot of this graph represents about the 50th percentile in terms of staffing. And you can see there is some linear component to staffing. As the volume goes up, which is down here on the bottom, the total number of hours of physician coverage goes up. But it's not totally linear. There is some semi-variable process involved there. There's really nobody who staffs less than 17,000 hours for a 20,000 visit ED, less than 20,000 hours for a 40 visit ED, and less than 22,000 hours really when you get to a 70,000 visit ED. So there is some variation to how this is put together. It's important when you're starting to look at your staffing to try to realize what that is. Now, it's also important that if you're down here, you probably need to add more staffing, where if you're up here, you're probably a little bit overstaffed. And those academic centers that participate in the benchmark committee can actually see where they sit on this graph. Now, coverage in terms of provider coverage in the ED on a daily basis, looking at some 2015, 2016, we provided really about 184 hours of coverage. And now in 2020, we're providing about 192 hours of coverage in the main ED. What's really interesting is resident coverage really has not changed over that time period. The residents represent somewhere between 54 and 55% of the total hours of coverage during that entire period. However, what has changed? When you look at the total coverage in the ED, residents now have a smaller percent of the total number of hours of coverage. We're providing more hours of coverage than we did in years past, but the total resident complement has unchanged. And what we have seen is that we have more APPs and more attending hours, which tells you, I mean, we do have some issues in terms of recruitment and retention of APPs. And this is a group of people that we're really going to have to start to nurture a bit more and take care of. Now, the faculty survey itself, demographics really haven't changed. There was a good response. About 2,500 salaries were put in this year. Not too much difference in terms of years of service, years post-residency, and so forth. So pretty much the same. What has changed a little bit, we've seen a little bit of maturation of our faculty, and we've had a bump in the 10 to 14 year category. And as a result, you would expect we're seeing a little bit more increase in the associate professor level as a result of that. So, okay. In terms of gender, we have been making progress in terms of gender equity in terms of our faculty, generally close to 60-40 as what has occurred over the past several years. The concern here, and is this just a blip? But so if you look at the new faculty who came on in 2020, fewer women, more males in there. Now this may just be a blip for 2020 because you could see how, as faculty have aged, how we have improved our gender diversity among our faculty. But this year we have a little anomaly that we have to track, and we'll see next year. We are pretty much a specialty of white people. And this is an area that we really do need to do some work in terms of improving diversity. Roughly only about 5% Black or African American in emergency medicine. So we have our work cut out for us in terms of trying to improve diversity of our faculty, which will ultimately match somewhat the communities that we serve. Now, number of factors are associated with EM faculty, with salary. Administrative duties, total years in service, academic rank, total clinical hours. It varies by region of the country and somewhat by gender, and we'll take a look at that. Over the past year, there was a significant increase in salaries, about 3.6% in total salary. If you take out the chairs and chiefs, the salary went up to about $305,000 after being fairly flat for several years. Looking at this a little closer, this includes chairs and chiefs. You can see that the base salary went up to a base of about 262, 263, but total compensation is 311. This difference in the compensation is made up by a number of other entities, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But bottom line is here, we are now 84% of base. Base salary makes up 84% of your total salary. The base salary did not go up as much. That only went up by about 3%, where total salary went up by 3.6%. In years past, base salary was a larger percentage, up to about 87% of total salary. But it has been consistent at about 84% for the past few years. If you look at total mean salary, excluding the chairs and chiefs and anyone in pediatrics, there was about a 3.3% increase to 305.9, so almost 306,000 for general faculty salaries. Again, breaking this out in terms of base versus total salary, you can see again there was a roughly 2.5% increase in base, but an overall 3.3% increase in total salary. And it is that difference in between that whether it's bonus, stipends, those sorts of things that make up the salary differential. First year salary increase was the largest at about 6.2%, and clearly was deserving because that salary has been flat for some time. So now the average base total salary for first year is almost $274,000. It should be no surprise that the longer you are a faculty member, and in terms of years of service as well as academic rank, salary increases proportionally. And interestingly, this is the first year that we actually did this, and looking at it by region, what we see here is the Northeast. Salary went up in 2018 and sort of drifted down, and then we had an increase in 2020. If you look at the South, almost identical to the Northeast. When we add the Midwest, you could see salaries went up earlier and have pretty much remained flat going into 2020. And the big winner here was really when you get to the West Coast, or to the West. There's been a significant salary increase over the past couple of years, literally 9.5%. So if we look at what is driving the salary increases that we have seen in aggregate for 2020, it's primarily driven by both the West and Northeast salary changes that have occurred. Now, there is a strong linear relationship between hours worked and salary. I don't think that surprises anyone. But there is also a relationship between administrative duties and salaries. So if you have administrative duties, you generally will work fewer hours and have higher salaries. Okay, and that's pretty consistent across the board. How about practice setting? In terms of total salary, we've seen some changes. You could see academic salaries have climbed. The community salaries are pretty much the same. So there's not much of a difference between salary that you're going to get working in community practice versus an academic practice. And these are average salaries. Obviously, if you're starting out in the community, you'll probably make a little bit more than you would make in an academic, but in the long run, the academic salary may actually be a little bit higher. It is clearly different in terms of clinical hours. In academics, we generally will be working fewer clinical hours than in a community setting or in some of the freestanding settings. How about in terms of gender? In years past, we had identified a gender gap in terms of salary, and that seems to maybe be leveling out a bit. Not much difference here between at the instructor level. There does appear to be a 5% premium as you go through assistant professor to professor. However, when you look at it a bit closer, the males tended to be more senior, and they tended also, if you look at the total clinical hours, they tended to work more clinical hours. So this may be one of the first times that we're actually seeing that we're actually making a impact on that gender gap that we have seen in the past in terms of salary. Compensation plans. Well, just one quick question about COVID. How did it impact your compensation plan? About 38% of the faculty saw a decrease in their compensation with COVID. But interestingly, about the same number of folks, 41%, saw extra salary or incentive compensation during COVID. So probably in aggregate, not much of a change there. Multiple components to compensation plans. As I mentioned, there's base, extra for extra hours, stipends, and bonuses. And most of our faculty are in a 3-component plan. Only about 16% have all of those components. And so you have base and generally 2 of the others, either extra hours and bonus, or a stipend and bonus, a stipend and extra hours. Very few plans now are getting all three of those. In addition, roughly about $68,000 in fringe benefits are provided to, on average, to all our faculty. One of the things that is changing considerably and is a little bit of concern, something to watch. In 2015, you could see here, approximately 63% of our time was spent doing clinical work. 13% in administration, 16% in education, about 8% in research. When we look at 2020, we see this mission creep in clinical. Okay, so 69% of our work is in a clinical environment, and it's really been taken out of administration, out of education and research. So this is something that I think we just have to keep an eye on. Rank in clinical hours, it should be no surprise that the further along you are, the fewer clinical hours you will be working. And in terms of location, again, academics tend to work fewer hours than in academic affiliated, community, or any of the freestanding emergency departments. So really quickly, in terms of summary, we have seen the academic salaries increase this past year. There's been little difference between community and academic salaries now. However, we are seeing some clinical mission creep, which means folks may be starting to work more clinical hours. APPs are playing a larger role in our departments, and we're making progress with gender equity, but not a lot, but we have a lot of work to do in terms of diversity in our departments. One of the things I think will be interesting as we see next year, with the job market the way it is in emergency medicine, there is already some downward pressure on emergency physician salaries, and it'll be interesting to see if we're able to maintain the salaries we have in the academic setting. And I'm hoping we will, and hoping that we'll be able to continue the tripartite mission that we have followed. So with that, I can end a couple minutes early and take any questions if anyone has questions.
Thank you, Dr. Motoro. That was a great talk. Actually, I have a question. So you mentioned here on the summary slide that academic salaries have increased. If I recall correctly, on a previous slide, you were showing one of the drivers of this is the administrative time. Do you know if by like almost a per hour or shift, so is the clinical academic salary actually increased, or is the academic salary being driven by the fact that more academicians have administrative time and pays more? Or maybe I'm just thinking about that wrong altogether.
Based on the number of salaries that we have, most of the salaries are based on general faculty salaries. And so that is a general faculty increase. And there are several slides that are in there where you can take out the chiefs and chairs, which are your administrative positions. And when you remove those, there's still a increase in the faculty salaries.
Thank you. Do others have questions? And I actually might ask another one.
Yeah.
I was curious if there is any sense from this data, I know not necessarily from the presentation, from a work-life balance standpoint, of a sense of how much departments are contributing. So, during COVID, there was quite a bit of push for departments supporting, or hospitals supporting, let's say, showers or scrubs or things like this, it has monetary value, but not really accounted for. I was curious if there is any sense, or from the data that's not presented, how much are academic departments being asked to support faculty in their work-life balance versus just increasing salary and having faculty kind of quote unquote figure it out on their own? Have you had any sense of this over time, or is there anything in the data that might suggest one way or the other?
I'm not aware of anything in the data. I'll call on Greg Archel if, Greg, you're out there. If there's anything in the COVID data that that we looked at that would have addressed that.
Yeah, I don't think we've actually collected any wellness type data. It's a good point. Probably kick that around, see how we might be able to address that moving forward. Good point.
Yeah.
And there are two, I know we're over time, but maybe we can do a couple minutes of two questions in the chat. One is, what trends do you see in the percent of total comp made up of incentive bonus comp?
The percent of total comp appears to be growing a little bit in the bonus piece, right? So that your total comp, the total comp has been the base compensation has been pretty steady at about 84%. And that's grown a little bit over many, many years, but it's been pretty stable at that point.
The last question is, are there resources to review salaries for emergency medicine physicians with fellowship training?
Yeah, that is one of our data points. It's just not in this presentation.
Yeah, it's
sorry to jump on you there, Dr. Bolter.
Yeah, no, it is in the database.
Okay, so we're just a minute over. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I also, maybe a virtual applause. Again, quite grateful to Dr. Volturo for a great presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.